Okay, we read chapters 1, 2, and 3 of the Twits. Now we are on chapter 4, which is entitled Mrs. Twit. And she is just as interesting as her husband. Let me tell you about it. All right, Mrs. Twit. Mrs. Twit was no better than her husband. She did not, of course, have a hairy face. It was a pity she didn't, because at any rate, would have hidden some of her fearful ugliness. Take a look at her. Oh my goodness. She looks very close to her husband, for sure. Have you ever seen a woman with an uglier face than that? I doubt it. But the funny thing is that Mrs. Twit wasn't born ugly. She had quite a nice face when she was young. The ugliness had grown upon her year by year as she got older. Why would that happen? I'll tell you why. If a person has ugly thoughts, it begins to show on the face. And when that person has ugly thoughts every day, every week, every year, the face gets uglier and uglier until it gets so ugly you can hardly bear to look at it. And there she is. This is when she was young, and as she got older, older. Ooh, look at this at the bottom. A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth. But if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely. That's this lady. She has good thoughts. Nothing good shone out of Mrs. Twit's face. In her right hand, she carried a walking stick. She used to tell people that this was because she had warts growing on the sole of her left foot and walking was painful. But the real reason she carried a stick was so that she could hit things with it. Things like dogs and cats and small children. And when there was the glass eye, then there was the glass eye. Mrs. Twit had a glass eye that was always looking the other way. Chapter 5, the glass eye. Take a look at her glass eyes looking the other way. Glass eye is a fake eye that people will put in so that they will look normal if they only have one eye. Unfortunately, Mrs. Twit, it's not looking very normal. The glass eye. You can play a lot of tricks with a glass eye because you can take it out and pop it back in anytime you like. You can bet your life Mrs. Twit knew all the tricks. One morning, she took out her glass eye, and dropped it in Mr. Twit's mug of beer. And when he wasn't looking, Mr. Twit sat there drinking the beer slowly. The froth made a white ring on the hairs around his mouth. He wiped the white froth off onto his sleeve and wiped his sleeve on his trousers. "You're plotting something," Mrs. Twit said, keeping her back turned so he wouldn't see that she had taken out her glass eye. "Whenever you go all quiet like that, I know very well you're plotting something." Mrs. Twit was right. Mr. Twit was plotting away like mad. You know, plotting. Plotting means planning something that they're going to do. Yeah. He was trying to think up a really nasty trick he could play on his wife that day. "You better be careful," Mrs. Twit said, "because when I see you starting to plot, I watch you like a wombat." "Oh, do shut up, you old hag," Mr. Twit said. He went on drinking his beer, and his evil mind kept working away on the latest horrid trick he was going to play on the old woman. Here he is plotting and thinking. Suddenly, as Mr. Twit tipped the last drop of beer down his throat, he caught sight of Mrs. Twit's awful glass eye staring right up at him from the bottom of the mug. It made him jump. "I told you I was watching you," cackled Mrs. Twit. "I've got eyes everywhere, so you better be careful." Chapter 6. The Frog. Here he is, seeing that eye. Ooh. To pay her back for the glass eye in his beer, Mr. Twit decided he would put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. He caught a big one down by the pond and carried it back secretly in a box. That night, when Mrs. Twit was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Mr. Twit slipped the frog between her sheets. Then he got into his own bed and waited for the fun to begin. Mrs. Twit came back and climbed into her bed and put out the light. She lay there in the dark, scratching her tummy. Scratch, 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 scratch. Her tummy was itching. Dirty old hags like her always have itchy tummies. Then all at once she felt something cold and slimy crawling over her feet. She screamed, "Ah! What's the matter with you?" Mr. Twit said. "Help! Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit, bouncing about. "There's something in my bed! I'll bet it's that giant skilly wiggler I saw on the floor just now," Mr. Twit said. "That what?" screamed Mrs. Twit. "I tried to kill it, but it got away," Mr. Twit said. "It's got teeth like screwdrivers." "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "Save me! It's all over my feet!" "I'll bite it off your toes," said Mr. Twit. Boy, they are so mean to each other. Jeez. Mrs. Twit fainted. Mr. Twit got out of bed and fetched a jug of cold water. He poured the water over Mrs. Twit's head to revive her. Psh! The frog crawled up from under the sheets to get near the water. It started jumping about on the pillow. Frogs love water. This one was having a good time. When Mrs. Twit came to, the frog had just jumped onto her face. This is not a nice thing to happen to anyone in bed at night. She screamed again. Ah! All right, there she is with the frog on her face. Oh my gosh. But golly, it is a giant skilly wiggler, Mr. Twit said. "It'll bite you off for your nose." Mrs. Twit leaped out of bed and flew downstairs and spent the night on the sofa. The frog went to sleep on her pillow. Ah, I'm so comfortable. Okay, so that was chapters 4, 5, and 6. Remember, we're reading The Twits by Roald Dahl. Such an entertaining book. I enjoyed this book so much. So stay tuned for tomorrow for chapters 7, 8, and 9. Bye-bye.